awake now, but it's time to admit it. Some of us were asleep in the last few years. Many of us who are privileged enough to be paid to work for justice had all but given up on winning unions at multinational brands in the near term. And then somewhere in the last 3 years or so, there was this great awakening, and the entire landscape for what's possible changed overnight as workers showed us how to effectively hold global corporations accountable. They modeled that investing in relational people-to-people activities that organize power based on their relationship to new and changing dynamics of employment in the global economy, and centering workers as whole people was in fact the key to winning. They didn't say it would be easy, nor did they promise it would be linear or neat, but they asked us, institutional leaders with resources and capacity, to stay with them, to stay woke. And workers asked us to do it not just for them, but for all of us and our desire to live in a healthy democracy. It's critical to understand two important terms to fully understand the significance of this assertion. And those terms are democracy and power. See, a healthy democracy is a system in which all people have various pathways to consult, confer, and collectively govern themselves. It's not just a system of political practices. It has to be applied to participation and decision-making in all aspects of our economic lives as well. So while voting and lobbying and all forms of policy work are important forms of democratic participation, collective bargaining across multiple channels democracy and participation in the economic arena is important, and collective bargaining is in fact one of the key pathways to doing that. So on the other term now is power, right? And at Jobs for Justice, we have a very specific definition of power, because it's often very misunderstood that people, it's like the power in numbers, right? And this is what we need to do, which is true. We often say that power is the organized people and organized money with the ability to control, create, or prevent some change. And certainly while power in numbers can be important, say when it comes to voting or boycotting or picketing, we particularly, when we think about workers, we can also disrupt. And boy, have we in 2023. The United Auto Workers showed us how strikes are the center of winning for workers, evolving the sit-down strikes to modern use with great success, winning tentative agreements at Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters successfully threatened to strike, and in so doing won a historic contract with the United Parcel Service this summer. Many workers in the entertainment industry, from writers to actors, have leveraged their own power to disrupt and successfully change conditions. If you're confused about why our opposition puts so much money into fighting workers' freedom of association, it's because of this. Because workers have power, and because workers model democracy, and through both, workers minimize employers' ability to exploit the many at the benefit of the few. It's also important for us to understand that power doesn't just go away as the economy changes, right? It simply shifts. And the relationship that we have to power at any given moment must be understood in order to make change in our global economy. And of course, those who understood this were perhaps the least surprised by the uptick in worker escalations over the past couple of years. But again, let's be honest, many of us, myself included, used to operating under a previous framework of understanding employment relationships had to be awakened to this shift. We were still caught up in our feelings about past setbacks. We tried to apply old estimations of power to an economy focused almost exclusively on wages and corporate greed. We tiptoed around race, assuming that we could just focus on wages and corporate greed. We tried to apply old models of organizing workers towards that power, leaning heavily on national staff to drive base-building conversations. And, after failing so many times, we all but gave up on our ability to organize workers at multinational brands, or at least until we had, more money to do the same thing repeatedly at a larger scale, somehow anticipating different results. But Mercifully, workers showed us a better way. After years of organizing at McDonald's and other facilities around the country, fast food workers evolved their strategy, leveraging their status as essential workers, a term popularized during the COVID-19 pandemic, to successfully pass the FAST Act through the California State Assembly, reimagining pathways for franchise workers to negotiate with large multinational brands as a sector. And I was really moved actually at a conference earlier this year when a woman named Jamila Allen, who works at a Freddy's fast food restaurant in South Carolina and is a leader of the new Union of Southern Service Workers, which was launched by SEIU, recently spoke to the victory's significance for workers in less union-friendly southern states, a victory that proved why it's important to think outside the box when trying to position workers at multinational brands in ongoing decision-making. And she said, building strategies around the intersection of economic and racial justice is critical to our success. Workers centered their full identities. They purposely centered their full identities as people of color, as women, as queer people, as Muslims, right? Because very, very rarely do individuals first identify themselves as a worker. They may say, I am a woman, I am Black, I am Muslim. And they may be more motivated by threats to these aspects of themselves than by their identity as a worker, right? And Kimberly Mitchell, who was in the book that Sarita and I wrote, and she's a veteran at Macy's Retail, right? And she's with the United Food and Commercial Service Workers. She said, if all you see when you meet me is that I'm a worker, you're missing the entire point. When the Me Too movement launched here in the US, organizing the associational power of women workers from A-list film stars to hotel housekeepers against sexual harassment and assault, the Tamil Nadu Textile and Common Labor Union, which was a women-led independent and majority Dalit trade union of textile workers in southern India, launched the Justice for Jasari campaign in honor of Jasari Kathravel, a worker killed by her supervisor in an act of gender-based violence. These women joined others across the continent to negotiate the Dindigul Agreement to eliminate gender-based violence and harassment, the first global brand bargaining agreement, which includes a set of enforceable agreements with major fast fashion brands like the H&M, the Gap, and Eastman Exports, the largest garment producer in India. And they would not have won had they not centered gender. During the same period, workers at 2 Amazon facilities in the US were engaged in a tense struggle for improved conditions. Workers in Bessemer, Alabama, mostly Black, called for help in their bid to form a union with the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Many workers shared how radicalized they'd been after the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota, having participated in uprisings for racial justice that gave them the courage to speak out about their own conditions during the COVID-19 pandemic, saying, this here on the shop floor, this is our Black Lives Matter movement. And simultaneously, workers in Staten Island, also radicalized by racial justice after Black workers were arrested and fired in the early days of COVID-19 for demanding better PPE. They won the first National Labor Relations Board union election at Amazon. All of their organizing efforts centered racial justice, and they won. So, sometimes you just need a small group of workers strategically located to act. Workers at Starbucks, Amazon, Apple, Trader Joe's, and many other large multinational brands have modeled this, organizing on their own at first without the staffing and money most of us assumed was necessary. And all of these campaigns won because they took the time to organize their memberships, to assess the conditions, to correctly calculate their power, and leverage it into a campaign that organized whole people around our shared interests. They also show that workers active in today's struggle are winning because they center race, gender, and the experiences of exploitation that they have because of it. So here we are today, officially woke. The best of pre-existing unions and worker organizations and newly formed Great Awakening era groups are continuing our awkward dance between union and non-union formations, traditional and independent labor unions, 20th century contract negotiations and expanded approaches to bargaining, and a slow recovery from playing in different sandboxes towards organizing around our shared values and our shared vision and our shared future. The best of all of these are stepping up to the challenge to support this new distributed labor movement and better understand what it's taught us about how to organize and collectively bargain in the current economy. Workers are imploring us not to be distracted by the messiness of building new democratic institutions or traumatized by the aggressive counterattacks waged by global brands. Just let us remember that democracy is, in fact, messy. These are regular people trying to figure out how to engage everyone in decision-making based on a vision of shared prosperity. And that's not an easy task, even for the most diplomatic among us. And yet, we have to persist. The stakes are too high for us to turn inward on each other. And what better place to do that than Jobs with Justice? Jobs with Justice, for those who are new here, is a national network of permanent community labor coalitions that organizes campaigns and makes other interventions to expand the ways in which and the number of people who can organize and collectively bargain. And that's with employers, with industry leaders, and other economic stakeholders, all of who'd probably like to see our constitutional rights end when we clock in. This is the place where we can hold those ongoing tensions and still push through to our shared prosperity together. Or as our organizing director, Nafisa, always says, I like to say, where we can hold tension. And she says, Jobs with Justice, we know how to do messy. Okay, you want to do messy, we can hold messy. Now especially, with the largest federal investment in industrialization since the New Deal, to build out the sustainable energy industry, we cannot limit ourselves to fighting over how infrastructure money is just spent city to city. We got to see the big picture here. This not only represents our generation's best shot at building a multiracial democracy that will sustain the planet and our descendants' existence on it for ages to come. Successfully incorporating workers into standard setting, even in a specific section of this new industry, such as the manufacturing of electric vehicles, would integrate more workers in some form of collective bargaining, a framework that in itself is, in fact, a practice of democracy. And further, given the dramatic move of many manufacturers to the U.S. South, the region where the majority of Black Americans still reside, such an effort would represent the labor movement's strongest chance to reverse racial inequality, specifically the hyper-exploitation that Southern Black workers have shouldered since the end of Great Reconstruction and later reinforced during the New Deal era, having been excluded from many labor protections. Never before has our generation seen an opportunity to find victory in a way that aligns the goals of climate adaptation, industrial democracy, and racial equality. So the phrase "stay woke" is a call for raising our conscious awareness of a situation, often a dangerous one, and to proceed strategically. It was not originally evoked to encourage people to turn around, to cancel imperfect leaders. It's always implied the necessity of continuing to move forward strategically, even if clumsily, and prepared for whatever danger awaits. Stay woke is a call to action for people to awaken to their conditions, to take agency over their future, and to organize shared power to achieve a better life. And that's exactly what has happened recently. Workers are calling on us to stay with them in their great awakening, to stay woke, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary if we truly want a democracy. And the truth be told, while there's still a ton to learn, workers throughout the country remain in active struggle. And despite our many successes, they're continuing to get their asses kicked by multinational employers who seem to have unlimited time and money to keep unions at bay. But the potential for increasing workplace democracy in companies that could never have been predicted in 1935 is far too great to sacrifice these efforts as a brief moment in history. Workers have done their part in lighting the flame, showing us all the way by calculating their power based on the current conditions, organizing others as whole people, person by person, having the audacity to do it in the spirit of building a healthy democracy. And our job now is to keep standing with them, accompanying them in battle by providing resources, capacity, expertise, validation for what they're attempting to do, not just for themselves, but for all of us. Workers have experienced a great awakening, and in the process, they forced us to wake up. And now more than ever, they need us to stay woke. Tonight, we're going to honor those who've led efforts in all of these battlefronts. From Ngaza Laughing House, a powerful Black worker leader in the public sector from my own home state of North Carolina. To the players, including many migrant workers of the Minor League Baseball Players Association. From the Communication Workers of America and the members who leaned into the union's broadband campaign, as well as the workers at Maximus poised to strike in the coming weeks if they have to. And of course, to the workers of SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild, supported by Build Power. Our honorees show us that many workers have long been ready to get behind a democracy worth fighting for. Tonight is a celebration. And some of you are probably asking how I can say that when so many workers, whole families with children, are dying overseas. We are flooded with so much heartbreaking news. From Maine to Ukraine to Gaza. We can celebrate and still call for a ceasefire. When I tell you that tonight is a celebration, it's not an attempt to turn a blind eye to these compounding crises. It's a call for all of us to not choose despair. Instead, we've got to see this moment that you and so many others have been called to stand up, even as the literal and metaphorical artillery shells fly. To see this moment and to see the bravery of regular people standing up to insist on freedom, to insist on democracy. And they're not telling us to be blind to the real dangers and threats coming at us. They're telling us to act anyway. Our opponents want us to believe that we are somehow boxed into a set of rules, as if laws cannot be abolished and reconstructed based on our values and our needs, as if we cannot decriminalize the undocumented mother trying to protect her children and instead criminalize the employer who violently threatens them, as if we cannot somehow decriminalize all the underemployed workers who are forced to feed their families by resorting to petty crimes and instead criminalize the reckless politicians who actively attempted to usurp the democratic process in the last election. As if we are stuck in the growing crisis of inequality. Do not be fooled. We are not stuck. Laws only change after the emergence of a robust movement that is willing to break them, even at the risk of reorganizing the very institutions we have built over the last century. Many workers are not waiting for union recognition to begin acting like a union, even when the path to a traditional union contract is dangerous, even deadly. Instead, they've tapped into the very power of workplace organization to demonstrate the necessity of new institutions and new laws to support what they are already doing. You may think that your current efforts, whatever they are just about your union, your community, your gender, your people. I assure you it's not. All of our families are depending on us to win. My family is depending on us to win. I believe that all of us here can craft the future of the labor movement in our own image, building the foundation for a truly equal and powerful collective bargaining climate for working people. And not unlike my family, who moved to North Carolina to escape the realities of Mississippi and attempt to scratch out a better life, your coworkers, your neighbors, your children have high hopes that you will explore strategies to get us all there, to explore the boundaries that you might push them, to challenge the norms that you might change them, and then to return home with a vision that will give them all new hope that things can and will indeed be different. So tonight, I want you to receive the workers that come across this stage with an eye towards that shared vision. And I want all of you to get some fire in your bellies, to get the clarity required, such that when your children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews one day ask you what you were doing in this historic moment, at this crossroads between democracy and authoritarianism, you'll be ready to look them dead in the eye and tell them, darling, we proudly stared tyranny in the face and beat it down like it stole our lunch money. And God damn it, you're welcome.